one. Waiting on the confirmation. And we are live. Hello, everyone. I am back with Russell. Now, Russell has been, for the previous WTCs, been crunching numbers. He's really good at spreadsheets and Excel arcs. I am not. Definitely not. You ought to have a look at my this is my notes. This is my handwritten notes for all of the WTC. Russell is much better at it than me. I am just a humanist. I teach English literature and history, right? So, um, but Russell, you've been looking at the numbers for this WTC and crunching through them. Was it difficult to get through?
Yes. So I think first caveat would be there are 90 lists, as you know.
Yeah.
There are clearly a few errors in the ones that were published. So first caveat, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
We may have some statistics that are wrong because the lists are wrong. Second thing, I've had to manually enter into Excel all 90 because they're all in different formats.
Yeah.
So I put them into my own format. There's always a risk I transcribe incorrectly, so we may have one or two errors pop up. But I would say I'm about 95% confident, maybe a little bit higher even than the data we've got. So
Yeah. And I know, and that is also, of course, also a caveat that there are still some lists are still being worked on because there are still issues outstanding. So, but we're going to have to see what happens. Right. I'm going to share my screen because Russell made a very nice PowerPoint for us for this one. So I am sharing here. Just a sec. Here we go. And I am going to show this from start. Just a sec. Here we go. Right. So just to reiterate for everyone, for the WTC, you have to choose 4 different nations. You submit 5 lists. One of them is a dummy, and we do have some of the teams submitting 2 of the same nations, so we know that one of them is a dummy. For instance, Poland submitted both a Western Desert and a British tank platoon, so 2 British lists. So one of them, of course, needs to go. It's 1,000 points, single generic tank or theater platoon. Vehicles and mounted transport cannot contest. So that is, I think, for the judges, they wanted us to not have as many tank platoons or discourage them in a little bit. So we'll see what that actually did to the selections. What do you think about it when you saw this setup, Russell?
yeah, actually, I must admit, as soon as I saw they were allowing tank platoons, that immediately made me think it could turn into just tank wars,
Yep.
which actually has not happened.
Nope.
That's probably a positive. And I think one of the reasons for that is that restriction on not allowing vehicles to contest is a good one. It gives you some balance. Otherwise, we could have just seen all tank lists.
Okay.
That would have changed the event quite a lot.
It would. Right. Let's go and see what the meta was like. So, order dice. We had 90 lists and 15.2 average. We both agreed on that. My calculations were also.
Yeah, there's one or two very slight differences, but they're very close.
Yeah. And for me, that the spread here was a little bit weird because we had the expected bump around 15, 16 order dice, right? But then it immediately fell around 17, and then it pulled up a little bit again at 18. And then we had only a very few at the very top end of 21, 22. So no like 24 plus lists, but that can be very difficult. But you can run MSU lists, right? Very high order dice counts, and very few at the very end, 10, 12, 11 order dice. What do you see when you see this?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's almost like it's a normal distribution curve in that you have so many of them in the center. You've got 53 lists that are 14 or 14, 15, 16. And that goes to 65 with 13. So you can see gamers have recognized that's probably the ideal number. I do appreciate you can play with more. I always think the risk with more is you give your opponent easy kill dice.
Yeah.
And I think that's possibly why we're seeing fewer MSU lists than we used to.
Yeah. Yeah, and fewer horde lists as well, because there are
Mm,
not a lot of hordes. But that, of course, may also be down to the single platoon, which does limit you to, in some respects, with what you can do and how you could
absolutely.
build lists, right?
And I do think maybe the format where tank lists are allowed has maybe scared some people off from bringing horde lists because
Yeah, yeah,
they can be particularly vulnerable to tank
yeah,
platoons.
they can. Right. Um, cool. Then the army selection. So we had a lot of theatre lists being taken, and not as many tank platoons as thought. But then some of the tank platoons were um, armored tank platoons, or armored theatre platoons, right? So there is a little bit of give and take in what the actual platoons are, and many of the theatre
Yeah,
lists do have multiple tank selection
absolutely. And
slots.
I'm slightly underestimating. So I put 23 lists are armoured
Mm,
platoons
yeah,
because three of the theatre platoons do not have a first lieutenant or a second lieutenant.
yeah,
So by definition, they're an armoured platoon. But there are other theatre platoons that allow multiple tanks. So the
yeah,
number is a little bit higher
yeah.
than that. We have a lot of platoons that allow double tanks, and then people are taking a armoured car to
Mm,
support. So they're creating quasi
yeah.
platoons, and we'll see that when we look at the number of armoured vehicles later.
Yeah,
But so
because
on the selector,
there's a lot of Bren carriers and armored cars, so you get a lot of these quasi pseudo tank lists, right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
I think
um,
only 22 reinforced platoons is interesting
yeah,
out of 90. So it just shows you the advantage you get from theatre and tank is pretty substantial.
it is. At least the players think it is, and
Yeah.
we'll see how they do at the end. You and I may have to do a recap at the end and see how everyone did. But yeah, um, I think we may see something here where the tank or the theater platoons end up at the top, but we'll see. Then the nation distribution is pretty much what we expected, I guess. We have a lot of British, we have a lot of Soviets. Um, Not as many Americans or Germans, but still a high amount of each. Japan is maybe not as prevalent as we thought.
Mm,
Some of us. Mm,
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and then a surprising number of Italian lists. um,
Yeah, that's a surprise, isn't it? I know it's only free, but even so, it's free. So
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
surprise. Um, other things that I was a bit surprised by the number of journalists because they do have a reputation for being weak.
yeah,
And that's explained later in that they can convert into good tank platoons.
yeah,
Um, um, I think Japan at 8, again, if you're facing tank platoons, maybe the Japanese, they have very weak anti tank options.
yeah.
So maybe people were considering that. Romania's appeared. That's really interesting. Actually, we haven't
And
really
that
seen that
really
before.
appeared because a lot of nations
Yeah,
have taken a single Romanian, mostly the Romanian allied
it's
platoon.
4 allied and 2 Axis.
Yeah,
Yeah, but the Romanian allied is a new one. The Chinese have become popular again. Well,
yeah.
somewhat popular.
Yeah,
And
and maybe because we saw them do quite well at the last WTC, where the Spanish team captain Alice he brought a Chinese list and of course brought his team to victory. So there could be
yeah, there
something
was
there.
a little bit of controversy there. They were
Yeah,
playing at the old
they
Sparrow rules until
they
round
they they
5.
couldn't really
So
read the FAQ or something. Yeah,
That definitely helped them.
it did. It did.
Yeah, to China there.
But then again, it may also be down to the missions because we know that at
Yeah,
least one of the mission heavily favors forward deployers, and the Chinese are really good forward deploying
very good
armies.
at that.
So
Timely objectives, I think,
yeah,
is
yeah,
the key one. Just in the others, it was really nice to see some other ones. So you have partisans in there, which are
yeah,
unusual. One unit of those from the French type selector.
mm,
You also had Australians. You had a Canadian
yeah,
unit as well. So just a couple of slightly different units. Only one Polish unit. So cavalry have really fallen out of fashion, it seems.
yeah. And I guess that's because as soon as everyone saw that the cavalry would have to dismount to claim objectives, that
Yeah,
immediately told everyone, it's not worth it. Especially in maybe again timely objectives where you have to take points every single turn. That is going to be rough for any Polish lists.
yeah. They
Um,
they tend to fare not very well against tanks again as well.
Yeah.
Even Polish Lancers have trouble with tanks, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. For some reason. Right. We also saw a few French lists. No Finnish lists though. The
No,
Finns are
again,
completely
no
out.
Finns.
Yeah.
I'm less surprised of it this year, where there's tank platoons and they're
Mm.
80s limited. But I've been really surprised by this over the last few years. When you look at them, their infantry is so strong,
Yeah.
and they do win tournaments in the UK
Yeah.
and score very well. So it is still a surprise to me that if you're picking 5 lists, people are just avoiding them.
Yeah.
It's a surprise. Also, Axis is really struggling. So it would be nice to see some Finns maybe.
It would. It would, especially if they did well. But I think a lot of the European meta has moved away from veteran skirmishes, which I think the Finns are much of a veteran skirmish army, and
Yeah,
they're doing other stuff. So I think it's maybe just a meta thing where we don't really see it. Right.
yeah, could well be.
Then we
Mm.
have the army builds. Now, and this was mostly me counting this up. This is referring back to my video on army builds. If you haven't watched that video, go and watch that. I sort of saw 29 armored or tank platoons. That was many of them have like armored transports that most of them are Bren carriers that can split fire, so you get sort of a miniature tank. Um, and then I had around 28 balanced mixed bag skirmish type of armies, many of them from the American teams. I sort of feel like I've seen so far that the Americans are more in favor of skirmish armies than many Europeans are. We had 15 barbecue lists, which is not as high as I expected. I expected more, especially because Dan Lane, the current ruling world champion, I guess you could call him, he was the one who was best placed at the end of the last WTC. He had brought a barbecue list and did that with the barbecue list. So 13 horde-ish or lists who had horde elements. As you saw in the order dice count, they're not really like true order dice spamming hordes, but there are lists that have a lot of infantry, especially the Romanians that we just talked about. And then 6 forward deploying board control lists. Of course, mostly the Chinese partisans as well. And there's 1 LDF Luftwaffe Defense Force, which has barbed wire it can deploy. So those were the army builds that really stuck out to me. Anything you would note down in this regard as well?
Yeah, I actually was expecting more than 29 armored lists,
Yeah,
so that has come as a slight surprise to me.
yeah,
So maybe I was too pessimistic. 15 barbecue lists. I agree with you on that number.
yeah.
Again, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's low. Maybe you'd expect every list to have at least one.
Mm,
Horde at 13 is quite low. I wonder whether people are worrying about the amount of time they have to play.
I think
And the
so.
and the forward deploy at 6, they're quite specific in what they do, so maybe that makes sense as well.
Mm. Sorry, I'm just being
You're
distracted
for a
here.
walk, Bo.
Yeah, I'm being distracted. I'm baking at the same time as talking to you.
What are you making? Are you making Danish pastries or
No, sausage rolls. They'll be my
even better?
lunch tomorrow. Right. Um, okay. We'll move on from the army builds. Infantry sections. So this I cannot read, so you're going to have to explain it to us. What
Oh,
is it
sorry,
that
Bo.
we're
Let
seeing?
me go over this. Right. So I actually think this is a lot more important than people think. So
Yep.
what this does, it shows you how many infantry sections an army has. So the
Yep.
minimum you can take is 3,
Yep.
typically. Actually, in theory, you could take 2.
Mm.
But the 3 is, as you can imagine, it's nearly all armored platoons
Yeah.
that are taking 3 because they can't afford to manage more. There was one that managed to do 10, which I love, and it was the Japanese Pacific Defenders, which lets you spam the inexperienced militia units. That's
Yep.
the list with 21 dice.
Yep.
But I've always been on the view 5 infantry sections. I still think this bolt action's an infantry game, and I tend to aim to have 5. So that's where we are. Just one caveat on the list: this is actual infantry sections. So there are a couple of units such as anti-tank or tank hunter units that are like 3-man units. They're not
Yep.
included here.
Yep.
I'm only looking at sections that are at least 5 men.
Yeah. So five men and up. Okay. Cool. And again, we see a huge distribution curve that sort of centers around five. 4 or 5 would be the norm.
Yeah.
And then going up from that would be very unusual. Many of those who are high in the infantry sections again are the Romanian lists and the Japanese, I guess.
Yeah, well, the Romanians, if they run properly, you could, in theory, get yourself 2, 3
Yeah.
lists, which would encourage it. Interestingly, the French list we saw, none of them took 3 experience to get the extra one. And of
Yeah.
course, Russians get their 3 rifle squad, shouts them, and 12 of the 18 British lists took Indians,
Mm,
unsurprisingly enough, which I think you commented on quite a lot with
I
Al.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah. That was not surprising once you saw how it was set up and that they
yeah,
had allowed Indians because it sets you up. You get to basically have 200 exit points when you're playing Brits.
yeah.
Um,
There's two
yes,
other armies that let you do that.
yeah,
So you can do it with the Allied Romanian, which is why they're
you
now
can.
appearing.
Yeah,
You can get combat pioneers in there plus
yeah.
veteran infantry, and then the other army, which are useful, really useful units. And then the other army you can do it with is the French. The
Mm,
problem is the units you have access to are pretty rubbish.
yeah,
So it's
and that
1,200 points of bad
yeah,
bad stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I think if you're not doing it for the British, you have to have a very specific reason for not doing it.
Completely
Um,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, right. Then there were the standout units. For me, of course, the Darker Stewards. There was a lot of Darker Stewards, but there were also other Darker versions or Steward equivalent, like we saw Panzer threes pop up again. You had a countdown and said that it was 61 or something like that.
There's 61 Stuarts. Some of them are, there's a few Recce Stuarts in there with the Brits,
Yeah.
with a few shots. And there's actually a couple of American M5s.
And there are a
Again,
couple of them that doesn't have the extra LMGs as well. So
that's
there are a
right.
couple of them that hasn't upgunned the Steward. Yeah.
So about 50 of them are upgunned.
Yeah.
So there's 10 floaters.
Mm,
So that was look. We was always going to get a lot of Stuarts.
we were.
When you consider the only armies with access to them in really meaningful numbers are the British, the
Mm,
Americans, and the Russians, the fact they're 60 just shows how popular they are. That's a
yeah.
remarkable number.
Yeah. It
Um,
is. And then we had engineers, a lot of engineers. Oh my
yes,
God, so
yeah,
many engineers. Um, and some of them are not even called engineers. There are those American assault
assault
groups,
squads,
yeah,
yeah,
assault squads with
and they've
with
got
double
Sturm
flamethrowers.
Pioneer,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
so I had to go and do a triple search to
yeah.
make sure I picked them all up. I'm pretty confident I got all of them. Other interesting things, some people were taking engineers and not taking flamethrowers. Not many
Yes,
of them, but there's a few around.
there are a few.
Hmm.
Many of them just equipped with BARs for Americans.
Yeah, that's right.
And I am not sure why that is, but it's there. And then of course we had the inexperienced medium mortars. They were everywhere. I mean, so many inexperienced medium mortars. You would not believe it.
I
Many
know.
lists had. I mean, more or less all lists that could took double inexperienced medium mortars. It was insane to over the lists. 60. That is an insane amount. And we also see a few heavy mortars and stuff, but the medium inexperienced mortars are everywhere. Um, that's new as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely. That's a massive jump on what we've seen in previous events.
yeah.
So just on that, there were we're going to look at that in more detail. But inexperienced mortars, there was 60 inexperienced medium.
Mm,
Only 8 were regular.
mm.
So only 8 of those have got spotters. So people clearly have decided they don't need spotters, which actually I am in complete disagreement with, which just shows you I'm not in line with the meta there, which I love.
Yep.
It's interesting to see different things.
Yeah, it is.
Um, but for
It
35 points, maybe you don't care if you lose a unit. Could
maybe
be that.
not. Or people are betting that there is more terrain on the WTC boards than last time, and then just hoping that any snipers will not get them. You know.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, we're talking about snipers as well, actually, because that
yeah,
number
we will.
surprised me.
Yeah.
So the
Then
other thing is the Panzer threes. you
Mm.
didn't see as many as I was expecting. But then again, there were only 12 German lists.
Yeah, and I think
So,
that's the reason why, because
mm,
most German lists that could take them took some. Um, then we had Gurkhas, of course.
yes, you
Many of
did.
many of the British lists have Gurkhas. Some of them are more or less all Gurkha armies, although
Yeah.
not all of them. Um, and of course, for the Chinese, we had guerrillas. They were really, really popular. And then, and this was a complete surprise for me, loads and loads of M30s, the heavy Katyusha-like multi-rocket launcher for the Soviets. It's fixed. It can have a spotter, um, and it hits a little bit harder than a regular multi-rocket launcher. But then it can only fire every second turn. What do you think about those M30s?
Yeah, well, we've gone from 0. We've never seen them before
Yeah.
at this tournament, and we now have 6. And it is a mix. Some of them are regular with a spotter, some of them
Mm.
inexperienced, which I don't like. I think I said in our chat.
Yeah.
Um, I think you made a point. The reason they're being picked is because then it means the Russian player doesn't have to take a Katyusha
Yeah.
to get access to model launch rocket systems.
Yeah.
So that's why they're doing it. The fact you have to rally it is
Mm.
one of the other reasons I would not take it as
Yeah.
inexperienced. I think that's a risk.
It is.
Um, but I can understand why players are doing it. And the other thing you made the point, it's a little bit stronger. Yeah, it's got a 4-inch template, which
Mm.
gives it 2 benefits. Not only will it hit more if it hits,
Yeah.
but when you maximize your target,
You're also
you
much more
you can
likely to clip other units.
hit
Yeah.
something else exactly. So it's a more dangerous weapon system. So yeah, I completely understand why they're being picked.
Mm.
Sorry, can I
Yeah.
just add one other thing there? Actually,
Yeah.
on the Gurkhas, so 2 things. There's 33 Gurkhas across the British lists. And the interesting thing there is there's only 35 veteran British units around
Mm.
that number. So 33 or 35 are Gurkha. So
Yeah.
if you're taking vets, people are taking Gurkhas. And then just to help everyone, there's a lot to talk about Gurkha paras. I
Mm.
put a picture in there for you of a Gurkha para. That is what they
Mm.
look like. So
So basically like any other Gurkha.
pretty much, yes. So they're not wearing denim with red berets, and they are they're in the Gurkha equipment. So if
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
wanted to know, there you go. That's what it
Yeah.
should look like.
But couldn't you also have found a picture of a Gurkha Maori?
I
That
tried. I did try for you.
uh, sucks.
Unfortunately not.
I wanted to know how I should model mine. Uh, yeah. Anyways,
Yeah,
right.
what you see is what you get.
Yeah. Right. Then we had the lieutenants, all the officers here, a load of inexperienced second lieutenants, and I expected that. I completely
Yeah,
expected
no
that.
surprise.
No surprise.
Of the 11 regular, 8 of them are Japanese because they have
Yeah.
to take regular. So yeah, you can see their attacks. Everyone treats them as attacks.
Yeah.
A couple of first lieutenants, which was interesting. People looking for the extra aura boost.
Yeah.
Um, the one thing we didn't have any of, and I think people are missing a trick here, we've got 0 intelligence officers. Now,
Yes.
if I don't want a bold supplement, let's for Germans, for example, if
Mm.
you are a German officer, you can pay 10 points extra, and you once per turn you can roll a dice, and you have a chance of getting the first dice out the bag.
Yeah.
If you've got a flamethrower list, or a
Yeah.
bit, why would you not want that for 10, 15 points?
You would definitely want that.
Yeah,
You
but
would
no one's gone
definitely.
with it.
Nope.
So maybe it's just me, but for me,
Um, yeah.
it's really worth looking at because we all know there's situations where, particularly where flamethrowers involved, you want that first dice,
Yeah.
and this gives you a better chance of doing it. But we didn't see it. And the other thing, they're just political officers. There's 12 of them, and again, that's all Russian and Japanese Kempei Tai.
Yeah. Pretty much as expected. Maybe one of
Absolutely.
the things that prevented people from taking that intelligence officer is the actual setup of the pack, because you would rather, I think, have an extra order dice that can contest and claim objectives, because the intelligence officer goes along with your lieutenant, doesn't he?
He does. Well, it depends on the army. So if it's the Americans or the Brits, he gets added to the unit. So actually, that gives you an advantage. You can turn your officer team from 3 men into 4 men,
Yes.
and you can give them all SMGs, and at that point, all of a sudden, they can do some work as well. So there's an added bonus. Look, I know we're getting off subject there. We're getting into the kind of
A little bit,
outer
little
meta,
bit.
but
Yeah,
it is interesting.
it
I
is.
think
Yeah.
more people should do it.
Then we have the mortars.
Yes.
As
Which we've
expected,
mentioned.
as we already mentioned, most of them are medium inexperienced mortars. We also saw quite a lot of heavy inexperienced mortars. Again,
Yeah. People
maybe
are
people
moving
have,
there.
yeah, and
We
maybe
think
people
that,
have a few points left over. Buy the heavy mortar
well,
instead.
you're paying 35 points for an inex.
Yeah,
Medium, you're paying 46 for a heavy. So for an extra 11 points,
yeah,
what it does is if you do hit,
mm,
you will kill that unit.
yeah.
Whereas I don't know how often it happens to you, Bo, but you hit with a medium mortar, and then you spend the next 3 turns, you're zoomed in, they're going down, and you just cannot finish off that enemy
That never
unit.
happens to me, but I will tell you that every time someone shoots a medium mortar at one of my tanks, it will immediately hit and destroy the tank for some reason. It's all sixes, 666. Right. Yep. But and very few light mortars. I was actually a little bit surprised about that because for me the light mortar is a really cheap order dice that you can take objectives with. So I actually thought about bringing a light mortar,
Hmm.
but ended up bringing something else instead for my list.
Well, there you go. You're a fan of them, Bo, and you still didn't bring one.
Yeah, true.
Personally, I think they're awful. I
Yeah,
really think they're awful.
yeah.
And why would you spend 24 points on that when you can get a medium for 35 and actually do some real damage? Range of 12 to
Well,
24.
I'm not looking to do
No,
damage with the
no,
mortar.
no. Don't bring a light mortar. If you're Japanese, maybe you take it as a knee mortar, but otherwise, no.
Okay.
It's a hard no
Okay,
from me.
I'm gonna have to bow to the general meta here, because but yeah, I'm not convinced that they're that bad. Yeah. Anyways, I wouldn't buy them regular. Okay. Right. Then we have sniper.
I just lost you on the sound, I'm afraid. Can you check your microphone, microphone, sir?
Did my sound just cut out?
Oh, I can hear you now, Bo. Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I don't know if it's me or you, but
I think it was
we're back on
my headset. Sorry. No, what I was saying was that the snipers, we have a lot of regular snipers. 9 veteran. I expected a little bit more veteran snipers, I guess. And then 1 inexperienced plus 1 embedded in a unit.
That's a good point. This does not include the Mackie. You get marksmen in some of the units. So it doesn't include that. This is just the individual sniper units. We only, out of 90 lists, there's only 1 with double snipers. And given the number of inexperienced mortars, I think a lot of players have missed a trick here. Maybe it's because, again, tank platoons of snipers useless against the tank. Maybe people are worried about that, but
or it could be I'm not sure, because there's a lot of the missions where forward deployment is a benefit here as well. Maybe it's just a question of what selectors they're choosing, but there's a lot of Japanese theater selectors that do have access to double snipers.
Absolutely. And okay, there's an argument. 100 points for taking 2 rifle shots sounds pretty horrendous, but when you look at what they can do, they're not a rifle shot. They can auto kill an awful lot of units out there. They can take out NCOs. They can disrupt artillery by putting them out of cohesion. So I personally was surprised to see, okay, 50 is still a lot, but that's 50 across 90 lists. I was expecting a lot more than this.
I must admit, I wasn't especially, but maybe that's because I'm not a fan of snipers myself, but I was expecting that some of the lists that could take double sniper would take double sniper. So yeah, I don't often use snipers myself, so.
No, I think it was the Stalingrad, one of the Stalingrad lists that took double snipers. It wasn't even a Japanese one that did it.
Yeah. Anyways, Then we had the teams. One purchased forward artillery observer. I do not understand that. I must admit, I don't. And I think it was even one of the Danes who bought it. But don't tell him that I said this. I don't understand it.
I think there's one reason you might do it. There's a Russian list. I think it's No Land Beyond the Volga, where if you take an artillery FAO, it gives you 2 artillery strikes. Now, at that point, I would consider taking one.
Yes.
Also, you roll 2 dice, and you take the largest number when you roll for range. So actually, at that point, I'm kind of interested in it. But 100 points for one shot, no. I know some people have used it quite well, but it's just too expensive.
I've actually once faced that No Land Beyond the Volga with it was a double platoon, so 2 forward artillery observers. My whole army got destroyed turn 4.
Oh, it can happen.
It can. Right. There were no medics and only 3 machine gun teams. And were they all inexperienced? I can't remember. No, one of them was
2 were regular and 1 was inexperienced, I think. Interestingly, it wasn't the Americans taking them. I have seen people play the American list where they take 3 inexperienced MMGs because they can, and they just put down kind of suppression. But look, we can see the problem with actually version 2 is very clear there. Machine guns are not being picked for
completely underpowered.
For an environment where they really should be. Medics,
and at least one of those machine gun teams is an LMG, a German LMG team,
German
which is what all machine guns basically should be, because it's pretty cheap, it's movable, and it's got 5 shots basically.
That's right. It makes sense. You're paying 35 points for 3 men, so your LMGs only cost them 5 points. Arguably. So there's some logic there. But look, 0 medics, that needs fixing going forward. Because really, they should be playing more of a role than that, I think. And then I just mentioned the anti-tank rifles as well. There's quite a few of those around. Nearly all.
Yes. A lot of anti-tank rifles. Again, I think it's because people expected to see a lot of light armor and transports as well, I think. And we are seeing a lot of that. That at least that's why I brought an anti-tank rifle. So I was on the fence with that light mortar before and an anti-tank rifle, and I ended up with the anti-tank rifle simply because it was better against vehicles. Right, that's the infantry teams. Now, anti-tank. So we already talked about the anti-tank rifles, 18 of those. 15 regular, 1 vet, 2 inexperienced. One of them mine. I didn't have the points to buy it regular. So
it was you.
And then we had 34 suicide bombers. Is that right?
That's right. So I've used the Japanese word for them because I prefer it. Nikaku. They're not all Japanese. The Chinese are taking them a lot as well. And they are either inexperienced or there's some veterans in there as well. And the veterans are because they have a chance of running through
the machine gun fire
and still getting to you. So 17 bomb dogs.
I am not surprised by this. I was a little bit surprised at maybe I would have taken more bomb dogs. I would have predicted a little bit more of those, but for the Japanese and the Chinese, I think you should take as many of these as you can, simply because they're very cheap order dice and they do threaten away enemy armor, and we are going to see enemy armor. And so I think they're a really useful tool. They're really finicky to get to actually kill a tank, but when they do connect with the tank, it's pretty likely that it dies. Then we had projectiles. Is that Panzerfausts?
So I've excluded Panzerfaust because they're one use. This is units that are firing an anti-tank weapon. So it'd be a Panzerschreck. Well, we have 0 Panzerschrecks, which again is telling. You've got 14 bazookas, 7 PX, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the other 2 would have been. So I'd need to go and have a look.
There were a few Panzerschrecks in a Panzertruppen.
Oh, that's it. The Panzerdestroyer. There was 1 unit that had 3 in it, but that's super expensive to use.
And maybe illegal, but we'll see what they say to that.
Yeah, well, there's a few lists, but to be fair to, again, the WTC, they did rule and make certain things legal that would normally not be allowed. So
Yes.
if people think they're spotting a mistake, keep in mind, it may not be a mistake. It may be a decision by the tournament.
Yeah. 7 Piats, that is many of the breach lists, of course, brought a Piat because you have to, more or less. I couldn't find the points for mine, but right. Any surprises here? Anything that you had thought would be different?
To be honest, no. I'm not surprised. A couple of the American lists were taking double bazooka, which I think if you can is not a bad idea. The Piats are well, they're all going into jeeps. You can see what the British players are doing with them. They're using them as form as anti-tank. 34 Nikaku, again, doesn't really surprise me. And I'd agree with you on bomb dogs, actually. I think they're quite a good weapon system. They do a better job. They do the same job as the suicide bombers, but they do it better, in my view.
Yeah, so, much better, and have the range, and it's the best anti-tank weapon in the game in my eyes. Right. Then we had artillery. We had light artillery pieces, quite a few of those, especially for the Brits. The 25-pounder was popular all around. We had.
Sorry, just to explain, by the 117-1, what that means there is 1 inexperienced, 17 regular, 1 veteran. In case anyone's wondering.
Yeah. And then we had 21 medium artillery pieces. Of course, some of them the free artillery pieces that the French lists got. 2 heavy pieces, and that is sort of the howitzers of the game. Any surprises here for me?
I was surprised at only 2 heavy.
Yeah.
Across 90 lists. Yeah. Now, especially given you can advance them without a transport onto the board.
Yeah.
And then, secondly, historically, WTC tables have been fairly sparse on terrain.
Yeah.
So I would have thought heavy artillery might have been valuable, but we've only got 2 of them.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, that is a bit weird, isn't it? And I guess many of the medium howitzers would be CIS 3s because they would.
No, sorry, no. That does not include the CIS 3s. I've put them in the anti-tank gun section because they're a medium AT. They're very good guns, as you can see. There's 23 anti-tank guns, 13 of which is CIS 3s.
Yep.
So yeah, medium artillery is more popular than it has been before, and I suspect that's because of there being tanks out there.
Yeah,
so you can
and maybe also as you talked about, the expectation of the tables being sparse.
Yeah,
right.
And for the light howitzers, quite a few of them were, as in that picture, the 25-pounders. So they have that +4 anti-tank shell, which is quite useful.
Yeah. Then we have 16 multi-rocket launchers, 12 of which are inexperienced. I think this should have been everyone, but I guess some of them were. Does this include like self-propelled ones, like Katyushas?
No, this is only in artillery slots, and we'll look at the extras later. That was actually fewer than I expected because they have allowed land mattress for the Brits. But despite that, only a couple were taken. So whether that's people just weren't aware of that, or whether they just decided they don't need them, I'm not sure. But a lot of German lists had Nebelwerfers, so that's where a lot of these are coming from.
Yeah. 23 AT guns, a lot of them CIS 3s that we talked about. I was surprised that people took AT guns, but I guess again that people are expecting a lot of tanks, so the AT guns does become a little bit more desirable, I guess. 18 AA guns, these I was not surprised by, and many of them are quite good weapon systems. These are the autocannons, some of them even heavy autocannons, flak Zwillings and stuff. These are really good.
Few Zwillings have appeared. We've got Beauforts there as well.
Yeah.
It's the Zwillings that stand out.
Yeah, it is. So 99 artillery pieces in total. That is more than 1 per army.
That's a lot, by historical standards for the
That
tournament.
is a lot of firepower coming our way. Really, it is. I'm worried now. I may have brought the wrong army. Right. We'll see. It all depends on the tables, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That will make it have a big factor.
Yeah. Armor. And this was, for me, it was expected. 156 tanks. 156. 34 armored cars, which I think is actually a little low. I think more or less every single list should, if they could, take an armored car. But
can I just say, Bo, as well, that is armored cars. So that's I've counted jeeps and bikes and other stuff separately. So that's armored vehicles with armor.
Outright armored vehicles. Yeah.
Same with the tanks. I've taken out 6 Katyushas.
Yep.
From that list.
Then we have 61 of them are stewards of various types, as we talked about before. 6 Katyushas.
Yeah, so I took them out of so it was 162 tanks.
Yeah.
But there's 6 cats. There's 5 Panzerwerfers as well. They're included because they're armor 7.
That is very high. You actually see almost as many Panzerwerfers as you see Katyushas. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, they're popular with the German players. They're all inexperienced. I kind of get it. And then you've got the number 1 most popular tank for the Germans. It's just beating the Panzer III, the updated version. It's the Flamingo. There's 9 of them.
Yep. That is cool. It's pretty much a suicide tank, right? You rush at the enemy, try to get there, and hope they don't shoot you.
Yeah, there's some truth to that, actually. Yeah. But they can give you a heart attack. I remember in Poznan, I played against the French, and they had a list with 3 of those. I had Japanese, and this is before Japanese fanatic meant you didn't order test, and that's how we played it. And I got a draw, but my God, that was the most insane game I've ever played. And the guy was so funny. So they are scary if they get into you. Oh, we were playing surrounded as well. So he was flanking them in every turn. They were rolling on and just burning a unit.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was great fun.
Right. There were no heavy tanks, but we do see a few medium tanks though.
OT-34s. So I've put that. We've seen some OT-34s.
Yeah.
A couple, and we did see an M3 Lee, which is a medium. There's a couple of Shermans around. So there are a few medium, but very few. There's no Panzer IVs, which really surprised me.
Not a single one. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would have thought if I was taking it, I'd say that I should check. But if I'd taken a German tank platoon, I would be tempted to put one in, just because every single time you do not fire at it at the right range, you have to order test.
Yeah.
And you never know. That could save one of your tanks from being shot at once.
It could, but it's fighting for the same place as the Flamingos and the Kugelblitz.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
We saw some Horses as well, actually, field cars with Flak 38s.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to see them appear. But yeah, I'm afraid it's a bit monotonous. It's Stuart.
Yeah.
The Polizei Italian M1542 with 20 shots.
Yeah.
Yes, but we all know what.
And then quite a few armored transports, of course, mostly for the British and the Soviets.
Yeah, so there's a few there. They are primarily, it won't surprise you, the Bren guns.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the German ones, the Hanemags, are just too expensive for what they do, so they're not getting picked.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame because they're such an iconic unit.
They are. They really need to be bumped down in price because they need to be on the table. It's really a shame because, I mean, how often were the Bren carriers really engaged in combat? But you do see Hanemags driving straight at the enemy and disgorging German Panzer Grenadiers, right?
Yeah. Actually, Bren guns were used a bit more than you think. I know the Reggie regiments in the British Army, they used to roll them up and they would position them up, put fire on them and would withdraw. So that maybe, but you're right. They were primarily a tractor. They were moving kit.
Yeah.
But they could do other jobs occasionally.
Cool. Right. Flamers. So we already talked about all the engineers.
Yes,
a load of them. And many of them had double flamers because they were the American engineers with the assault teams, right?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of burner lists. Barbecue lists.
Yeah.
And there were quite a few that were maybe 2 flamethrowers, which I guess you wouldn't call a burner list. But
no, not if it's only 2, but it's then it's a toolbox for me. Then because I mean the flamethrower is a useful tool, right?
It's a useful threat as well.
Very useful.
Just by putting one in a jeep and flanking it, or putting it in reserve, your opponent has to think about it. So for 70 points, it can cause problems. Yeah.
Then we had 33 flamethrower teams, which I guess is just a cheaper version of an engineer unit most of the time. If you're buying the small engineer units, you might as well get a flamethrower team as well.
Yeah, maybe. You think you pay 50 points for 2 men, or you can pay 70 points for 5 men doing the same job. So an extra 20 points gives you 3 extra men. It makes it a little bit more resilient. So yeah, maybe it makes sense.
Yeah. And then we had 14 flamethrower tanks. Of course, most of them were the Flamingos. We already talked about those. There were a few armored car versions, like tankette versions with.
Only a couple, not as many as I expected.
Actually. Not as many as I thought. I had expected to see a lot more BA-20s for the Soviets.
Yes, and we've not seen them at all, really. That was a real surprise.
Yep. Other vehicle options, soft-skinned armored cars, that were 29 of those, including upgun jeeps and stuff like that, long-range desert group
British
jeeps.
are really leaning into this. There's a lot of SAS and para jeeps that look a bit like that one in the picture there. So, they're pretty nasty. They're good pieces of kit.
Yeah, and they're very, very cheap. We had 191 transports and tows. I expected as much. I actually expected it to be higher because I expected there to be more tank platoons. But and of course with tank platoons you're going to need to have transport for everything. So, but it is still quite high. It's more than 2 per list. So it is still pretty high.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the armored transport, as we already talked about, 33, 25 of them are Brencan carriers, pretty much as expected. I guess the only thing that I was curious about here was how much that ruling that transport did not count towards objectives, how much that would push this in one way or the other. For me, it hasn't pushed it a lot. Do you see any major changes from what you would expect at a normal tournament here?
It's really interesting. There's this real debate about transports amongst players, and on the one hand, they do give you that extra movement and flexibility with your units. On the other hand, they're vulnerable, aren't they?
They're really vulnerable,
and don't do anything after they've moved. So. I guess it depends what army you're running and how you want to synergize it.
Yeah. And for a tournament, you're playing 6 games. Kill points are secondaries, so quite often those trucks will just be easy kill points for an enemy. Yeah. Right. The Brits. We had 18 British lists, plus a few Canadian and Australian, and most of them
were...
One
Canadian, one Aussie,
yeah. Most of them were Indian British lists. 12 of them
12
Indians.
of 18, that's right.
Yeah. 6 tank lists, 5 theatre lists, 1 armoured theatre. I sort of expected that. The British tank platoons are quite good, especially because you can take the Indians, which means that the downside of having a tank platoon is, of course, you're limited in your infantry selections, but you get a free infantry selection.
Of the other theatre ones there, a couple of them are lists from Soft Underbelly or Western Desert where you can take a couple of tanks, so you can see what's happening there.
Yeah. And of course the British tanks are very, very good, as are their armored car selections. Not a lot of inexperienced infantry though.
Brits don't run them really.
And then 50-50 for regular and veteran. That is also sort of what I expected. Maybe I would have leaned a little bit more into the veterans, but I mean British veterans are really, really good. We already talked about a lot of the veteran units are Gurkha units, and we see a lot of vehicles, of course, because we see a lot of tank platoons here.
Absolutely. Well, it's a little known fact that the British Army was the only fully motorised and mechanised army all through World War II.
Yeah.
People tend to think it was the Germans, and nowhere close. It was the British. So that's reflected actually, to be fair, quite well in the builds. Every single team brought one British Army, which is understandable given that, as we all know, they did win World War II.
Yep.
Almost single-handedly. With the help,
don't ask the Russians to say that.
I'm sorry, Australia's just wrong. Obviously, we got massive help from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, but so I'm magnanimous.
The victors can be magnanimous.
No.
Right. The Soviets had 17 lists, which surprised me. I thought that every single nation would bring a Soviet list. They didn't.
I did. I really wish off the top of my head I knew who didn't, because I'm desperately scanning quickly to see if I can see.
But there are 18 nations that's going to.
Interesting enough, I think it was USA Team 1 that didn't bring them. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I don't like commies.
That makes no sense, and you know it. Yeah, it is USA 1, you're right.
Yeah, and even their China list is a nationalist one. So I think it's clearly a political decision.
It's a political, definitely a political decision. Right. 2 tank platoons, 2 reinforced platoons, and then all either CeeLo Heights or the Stalingrad Street Fighting Academy. That was very much
a couple of street fighting.
expected.
But you knew that was coming. You said that. I remember you predicted this. So.
I did. I knew this was coming. Exactly, this was coming. Because the Soviets are just, and these 2 selectors are just so good. They're the perfect mix between what you can take, what selectors slots you have open for you, so you can really boost out on the infantry at the same time as you have enough armor. I think these are possibly the best selectors in the game. Right, 96 infantry squads, a lot of those, and quite a few inexperienced, 36, 18 regular, and 42 veterans. So
remember 17 of those 36 are also included, because you get a free 12-man unit. But even so, there was a lot of Straff battalion taken.
Yeah.
The people are still buying shirkers.
Yeah, and some people are still buying assault engineers with body armor as well.
Most of them have body armor, some of them don't. You do get some lists where they've got like one of each, which I actually kind of like. Yeah, they're doing different jobs.
Yeah, a lot of CIS-3s, a lot of dog mines, and the M30s. Yeah, I think the Soviets. I think the Soviets are going to do well.
I think actually there's a debate about which set of armies is strongest. I personally think it's a toss-up between the Russians and the British.
Yeah.
In terms of who can field the strongest army.
Yeah, me as well. Right. The US, 12 American lists, 2 tank platoons, 7 theater lists. Most of them being like from one of the Pacific books.
Yeah, it was very much Marine. Marine burner lists, Marine barbecue lists that were appearing, which is understandable.
And we had 62 infantry squads. Not a lot of inexperienced, but a lot of regulars. I sort of expected this from American lists, just because you can get regular engineers, and their skirmishes are really good, and regular skirmishes are the way to go. Right, 19 engineers, 14 assault squads, no air observers. Air observers.
Sorry, Bo, but on that, so that's 19 engineers and 14 assault squads. So that's what, 33 across 12 lists. So you can see what people are doing.
Lists, yes. Yeah. That's a lot. That's really a lot. And no air observers. That is also pretty much expected, because it's just so random whether or not you get that airplane coming down. Yeah, you can get it twice, but still not worth it. Like, in a third of the games, you're going to hit your own army, and it just sucks for a tournament.
Well, actually, statistically, it should only be 1 in 6.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of maths on these, because I was desperately trying to build a list that would work with 2 forward air observers, which was just absolute chaos. When it worked, it was the funniest thing you've ever seen. But yeah, they are very hard to use effectively, and they're random. So good players tend to avoid random outcomes.
Yeah. The Germans, 12 lists, 7 of them are tank platoons. I expected more of them to be tank platoons, to be honest.
So did I, actually, yeah.
Yeah. 32 tanks, 5 armored cars, and flamingos are popular. A lot of multi-rocket launchers as well. And then we have the infantry, with most of that being, well, I can't see it. Just a second.
So it's 13 inexperienced, 15 regular, 17 veterans. So actually pretty balanced.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, real mix there.
Yeah,
but not
real
many.
mix.
So across 12 lists, that's very few infantry.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that most of these German lists are going to struggle with. If their infantry goes, they will struggle to win many of the games.
Yeah, we have I have discussions with the Welsh team going into this, and we kind of have a team discussion that if you've got an opponent who's got 3 infantry sections, just kill them.
Yeah.
Because if you can get rid of them, it's very difficult for them to win.
And then it doesn't matter how much you lose killing those 3, but because you're going to win no matter what, more or less.
Yeah, it puts you in a great place to do that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And here at the end of the selection, I have a little thing that I sometimes do, and I think we should do together, which is I think we should make predictions.
Oh, dangerous.
It is dangerous, but go on the line and just give it our best shots. I have been doing my math, which I'm really bad at, but for me, and this was really difficult. You know, I've got this. Yeah. Inspired by you, Russell, I've really been started working on ranking lists, and I actually ranked all the lists for going to the WTC, and then just added them up for each team. And for me, the team that is going to win, it is going to be like with 1 point in the ranking section. It's going to be Wales.
So you like their list most? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think they had the hardest lists. England won right behind them. And then I had a bunch of lists right behind that, which was Italy and the Netherlands, and Spain won and Denmark won. So it was really difficult ranking my own team's lists, by the way.
Yeah, it's hard to do that, isn't it? Yeah,
it's really hard because you get blinded by what they're thinking and all of that. But so my prediction is that Wales will take it. England will come second, and then it will be a toss-up between Italy and the Netherlands, just based on lists,
just based
not
on
the
lists,
players.
Yeah. Now the caveat to that, of course, is the structure of the draws changes everything.
It does.
So the 4 groups and the way they're structured means, my goodness, I hate to break it to you, Bo, and you know, but my goodness, you've got Germany 1, Spain 1.
Yep.
Denmark 1 and Italy 1. Now, initially, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know Italy well, but just looking at the way they've built their lists would suggest these guys know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you have a group there where you could end up smashing the hell out of each other before you get to day 2. I just don't know.
Yeah.
And then, with the greatest of respect to the big group, the group of 6, I think you mentioned the Netherlands. You like their lists a lot.
Yeah, and the players as well. The players are really good.
Is what I think you've said. But then you've got England 1.
Yeah.
And I would imagine they must be licking their lips with the lists they've got and the players they've got and that draw. It could be completely wrong. We just don't know, do we? But I think there is a possibility you might see a couple of teams, maybe England and Netherlands, having really big leads after day 1.
It could, yeah.
And it'll be a case of, can you chase them down? And actually, I think Denmark, Spain are good enough. Germany too, on the day, they are good enough to chase down those teams.
But it will depend on how much blood is drawn in that pool, whether or not we even have that option.
Well, the horror scenario, though, would be, say if Germany, Spain, Denmark and Italy cancel each other out, not only will they maybe end up with 8 wins each or something crazy like that, they're going to have to play again because it's only moved to Swiss. And that is insane. That is a point where you're like, guys, you need to look at your format.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say other than hope it doesn't happen. I really hope you get 6 different opponents
Yeah.
Because it makes the results a lot more valid.
It does.
But yeah, it's fascinating. Other things I noticed, I think the island lists are stronger than they were last year, so we're seeing a change there.
Much stronger, yeah.
The Spanish 3 and 4 lists are very interesting. Poland, we have to keep an eye on. So
yep.
So I like Spain, Denmark, Germany, Italy in Group 1 is tough. In Group 2, Wales, Spain 2, Denmark 2, and Poland. That's a good, strong group, but it's not Group 1. Group 3 is Spain 3, USA 1, France, and then England 2. I think France will fancy that. The US potentially. We have to see how much they've pushed on.
Yep.
And then the last group, again, the problem is with Group 6. You play 3 opponents, not all of them. So your matchups may matter. So England are playing USA 1, they're then playing Spain 4, and then they're playing Sweden. Netherlands are playing Spain 4, then they're playing Sweden, and then they play Ireland. They're the two.
So I fancy the chances of Netherlands and England coming out ahead.
I'd love to see them have to play each other, because they could end up on 11 wins or 10 wins, which means they would face each other, because they're not going to face each other despite being in the same group. So that would be good. But we'll see. So predictions, who do you think, Bo, other than Denmark aside, obviously?
Yeah.
Do you have a feel for who you think's going to win it this year? Not putting you on the spot, but
I don't know all the players of the new Welsh team. So going off the lists, that the Welsh team was my pick. Going off not knowing the players there, I think it's going to be England 1. And that is just because they have the easiest pool, and the players I know all the names from watching the UK tournament scene. So I think it's going to be England 1. They're good players. They know what they're doing. Topher knows what he's doing as a captain. And if they come out ahead from their pool, we are at least one team in pool 1 is going to have to cut down every opponent. And if one of us does that, if Spain or Denmark or Italy or Germany manages to do that, then it will be that team that wins. But if they don't, I think it will be England.
I agree with you completely. I think going into it, I probably would say, given the draw, maybe we're thinking England 1. However, I completely agree with you. At the end of day 1, from Group A or Group 1, if there's a team that can get 9 wins, say, I think they automatically become the favourite for the tournament.
I think so. But if they can't, then I think England 1 has this. And it's that's the draw. That's what happens. Yeah. But it will be interesting, and we will be back when we have the results as well. Thank you so much for doing this with me again.
No, it's been a pleasure, bud. Absolute pleasure.
Right. That was it, everyone. And we will be back to see how it all went at the end. Maybe do a little bit of reflection on our predictions as well. Right. Thank you so much. Cheers.
No, my pleasure. Just one thing, Bo, as well. Just on the YouTube, if people do leave comments or they have questions, we will endeavour, I guess, to answer them. So if they've got questions about the lists and other stuff, if we have time and we're free, I certainly will try and answer for people if they want to ask stuff.
Good. Right.
Okay. Thanks, Bo.
That is it. Cheers.